those of you who don't know me, I'm Anaka Aiyar, and I'm a postdoctoral associate who's had the great pleasure to work with TCI for the last 2 years. Shubha is generally a very hard person to follow in a presentation because he's so good. But anyway, I'm going to try. So let me just start by saying that I think it's first really important for me to acknowledge that this book that we're coming out with, Professor referred to it as Rising Food Systems for India, but now we've changed the name to Transforming Food Systems for a Rising India. And my co-authors have been really key. This is Professor Matthew and Andalib in making this book actually happen. It's been hours of sweat and tears and arguments and negotiations that have brought this entire book together. And we're really excited that it's out in press. I've been given the hard task of telling you in 5 minutes what this entire book that we've been working for 1.5 years is about. But I'm sure next year, as Professor said, there's going to be a wonderful book reception and you'll hear more about it. But let me try and summarize what I think are some of the most interesting things in our book. So key to the goal of our book is to envision a robust food system for the future. And this requires us to assume what this would look like. And we assume it to have a nutrition-secure population where people have the capability and opportunity to access balanced and affordable healthy diets and whose health outcomes do not reflect their lack of ability to access these diets, right? So here at TCI, we're working on very many current issues. This is the first time we're sort of pivoting some of these issues towards the future in our book. So we see the threats to the future food security. We see them to be the rapidly increasing populations. Now, the thing about rapidly increasing populations is that the challenge is twofold. In India, we have increasing numbers of people, and feeding them is going to be a huge challenge. But on the other hand, we also have increasing income per capita, and that means they're going to demand more diversified nutrients. So these are going to be our two challenges. These rising populations are now going to live in urban areas, and one of the key challenges for policymakers will be how to think about feeding urban populations. How do you move vast amounts of food from rural areas to urban areas and ensure that they are still food secure across the country? Another big thing that we find in our book is rising regional inequalities. Policymakers need to think long and hard about how to make the current lagging states catch up with the rapidly transforming states in our country in order to ensure a more equitable food system. In terms of the nutritional challenge for the future, while we are making progress here at TCI at tackling undernutrition, it's going to be obesity and non-communicable diseases in the future. Right now, we are a 20% obese population, and that challenge is a non-trivial challenge for policymakers of the future. And finally, in our book, we think that one of the major challenges for the future is going to be climate change. And climate change is going to really affect food security within the country. So keeping all these challenges in mind, we propose a food systems approach. And the reason why our approach is really interesting is because most of the other approaches that look at agricultural production or economic growth or better nutrition have been sort of unidimensional. They don't consider the spillover effects of interventions on the other domains that they're affecting. And this is what we seek to change through our book, right? In our book, we conceptualize these interlinkages, and we basically discuss methods and the evidence surrounding these methods on how different interventions can impact these three domains. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll just give you a small example of what I mean by this. So let's start with the example on climate change. We know that climate change is going to provide a huge threat for our food systems in the future. So in our book, we address this through various categories. In the agriculture portions of the book, we look at the role of technologies, and we look at what kind of technologies will help us in order to create more climate-sensitive food systems, right? In terms of health, we look at what are the implications for micronutrient deficiencies when food systems, when climate change impacts the availability of proteins and micronutrients, and we discuss the role of technologies such as biofortification in overcoming some of these challenges. In terms of economic growth, The one thing that we envision is how food supply chains can be used, or rather, they can be made efficient in order to reduce food loss that is going to come from these climate change threats. Similarly, when it comes to increased populations, like I mentioned before, we're going to need to feed more populations. We talk about how agriculture systems need to diversify and how can they increase their productivity. And we also discuss the technologies that are needed for this. The other thing that we discuss is that it doesn't matter that we have increased populations. If we don't know how to employ them, this is going to be a particular problem for us. And finally, we look at the implications of increasing population on non-communicable diseases, and how can we tackle these things using health technologies. So this is kind of broadly what we look at and how we tackle it through all the chapters in our book. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.